Hello everyone, I'm back again to make hopefully the last video in this series about why I left. I also want to include in this video the answer to the question why I never went back, because as you're probably starting to see a pattern, um, the reasons I left aren't necessarily because I found out the whole thing was a sham, but that's why I didn't go back. So I'm going to get into kind of how that happened. First of all, I just want to talk about when I got reinstated. I thought that was really going to help me, having my friends back and all of that, help me to once and for all get away from this man that I didn't want to be with, but I felt something. I felt like I owed him something, like he was studying to be with me and all of this, and I felt like I at least owed him friendship or something. So it was really hard to just cut ties completely. But the fact was, getting reinstated, the initial love bombing that resulted did feel good, of course. You feel like, oh, these people miss me, and it makes you feel pretty good. But, everyone coming up to me and giving me hugs and, oh, welcome back and everything, it almost felt like, well, I was here this whole time. And if you really cared about me that much, you could have just acknowledged me, at least. But the fact is, nobody did. So it kind of just made me feel a little bit empty, and it finally kind of dawned on me how weird this whole process was, because, a simple announcement and now everybody was able to talk to me again, whereas before it was almost like I was invisible to them. And I actually remember in my congregation, not when I was disfellowshipped, but when somebody else was, there was actually a local needs about not smiling at disfellowshipped people, or not even giving them a nod or a wave or a smile or anything like that, because that's acknowledging them and making them feel good, and they have to be punished. Or I don't remember how it was worded, but it was really weird. And I remember sitting in that local needs thinking, like, is it really that bad to smile at these people? I mean, we smile at other people in the world that we don't associate with. When you're passing by somebody, or you go up to the till at your grocery store, or, and you catch the eye of someone, and at least I always just smile at people. So I was really put off by that local needs, but of course I just pressed it aside. There were a lot of things I pushed aside in my mind. So anyway, everyone's love bombing me, and that felt good in the moment, but of course I still didn't have it the way it was before. There were still a lot of young people my age. Not that I had a lot of people my age that were friends necessarily. I always had older friends, but there were still some people my age that didn't want to associate with me. I think probably because they wanted to, see proof that I was good association, I guess. So now I'm back, I'm going to meetings. It wasn't very long that I was going to meetings, and things were kind of back to normal. Kind of. When I mentioned in my last video that I had seen a man that I had known from the past when I was having lunch. So I was on my lunch break from work. I went across the street to have lunch, and he came in, and I saw him, and I just, all of a sudden, it just came back to my memories. So I'm going to explain very briefly the story of this guy. So when I was like 18, I think I had to have been 18, because, anyway, I went to a gym, and I got a membership there, and it was just a local gym in my area, and the people who owned it were like really nice, and I just used to talk to them. It was a husband and wife, and I used to talk to them whenever I'd go in, whoever was there, either the wife or the husband. Sometimes they were both there, and we would just chat, and they were a really nice couple from Britain. So, and I'm just a very friendly, outgoing person, so I very much enjoyed the opportunity of getting to know them, just as I'm going to work out, having a brief conversation before I start and a brief conversation before I leave. It's just who I am, and I am still that way. So anyway, I was working out one day, and at the end of the day, I just went to talk to the woman before I left, and we were just talking a little bit, and she says, "Oh, you know my son?" And I said, "Yeah," because I didn't actually know him personally, but I had seen him come in there and do his workout and everything like many, many times by that point, because and I knew it was their son only because you can see the resemblance, and he'd always go and talk to his parents, so it was pretty obvious, pretty easy to put two and two together. So when she said, "Oh, you know my son," I was like, "Yep." And then she said, "Oh, he said to me that he wants to ask you out, but he's too shy," or something like that. And then she said, "And I said to him, don't be silly. She can only say yes or no." So I kind of got that, okay, she wants me to like say something to her, whether or not I am, flattered or something. So, but I was just really shocked. I didn't actually expect her to say that at all. So, and of course, I had like no self-confidence. Like, and here I am, I'm dating my online boyfriend because I'm so scared to like date anyone in person. So, yeah, I had like no idea. So I didn't know what to say. I was actually really flattered, but I didn't know what to say, and because I was kind of in a relationship at the time anyway, I just was a little bit I don't know what the word is, embarrassed or something, and I just kind of I said, "That's funny." That's what I said. And then the conversation ended, and nothing else ever come of it, and we said our goodbyes and whatever. But I left, and I just couldn't stop thinking of that. I'm like, oh my gosh, really? Like, this person actually, why would they like me if not, they don't even know me, they just see me in the gym, and it's not like I'm all that attractive, especially when I'm working out and getting all sweaty and all this stuff. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, that I must not, I was just really surprised. So I'm like, is this even true, or is she just saying this because she likes me and she's trying to set up her son or something? Like, I was like, this is just really weird. So all these thoughts kind of go through my head, and I didn't I didn't think much. I didn't really think it was completely true, but if it was really flattering, because I didn't dwell on it a lot, but when she mentioned it, I was like, well, he's actually really good looking. And I just felt like, wow, really? He likes me? So anyway, when I went back to the gym the next time that he was there, I decided to test this theory out. It's actually pretty funny, but anyway, so I'm working out, and I always kind of keep in my mind's eye, I'm paying attention to where he is in relation to me at all times, and trying not to appear too obvious about it, and every now and then, just to see if I can prove to myself whether this is even true information, I just look over at him to see if he's looking. And I must have done this, like, I don't know. I don't even know how many times I did this. More than one day. In one day I did it quite a few times, but I did it at other times. And every time I would look over, he would be looking at me and he'd look away. And it was this all like, you know, oh my goodness, it was hilarious. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's true, I think. So it was really flattering, but I never ever did anything about it. It was just kind of like a little confidence boost for me at the time, and I was too scared or nervous to actually do anything about it, to go up and say hello or anything. The most we had ever said was like hi as we were passing by each other, or like I smiled at him or something like that. And that's the most that ever happened because I was way too scared at that point of doing anything bad. You know, my online boyfriend was safe because nothing could ever happen between us. But this person who was right here and right now was kind of like, I don't know, I was too scared. So that's the little story about this guy. So now I'm seeing him. While I'm eating lunch, he comes in and I see him there. And I don't know if he sees me right away, but I see him there. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I suddenly get this like feeling, this fluttery feeling, this nervous feeling. I'm like, am I blushing? What's going on? And I just really, really liked him. I really wanted, I just couldn't, now it was like, it just brought all those memories back. And I was like, I wanted to see what could become of this, you know? So I didn't talk to him at that time. He got his coffee and he started to walk out, and I was about to leave, so I walked out as well. And I went to my vehicle, and I see him in his vehicle, and we're both just staring at each other, right? Like literally, like we both acknowledge that we're seeing each other, and we're just staring at each other. And I'm thinking to myself, like, just come talk to me, because I just can't come talk to you. That's what I'm thinking, because I was so scared to do it. So I'm like, just come talk to me. But it didn't happen. We just kept staring at each other like idiots for a while, and then eventually we both drove our separate ways. So now I can't get him out of my head, and it's just really annoying. So I'm going to the meetings, I'm doing my thing, and he's just in my head like constantly. Couldn't stop thinking about him. I was just really curious to get to know him and learn about him. And I mean, this guy obviously, without even really knowing me, sees something about me that interests him, and me too about him. And I'm just like, okay, well, I just want to know, I just want to see, you know, what he's like. So I decided, oh, I know how I can, because I was like a little bit worried that maybe I'd never bump into him ever again, right? Because it had been quite a while at that point, because now I'm 20 years old and I hadn't seen him in 2 years probably. So I remember his, you know, mom's name and his dad's name, and I looked them up on, and I knew his name too, so I looked him up on Facebook, and I'm like kind of checking out his profile, and I'm like, he seems like a really nice guy. He's definitely he's single. There's no like pictures of him and another woman or anything like that. And he was really just a nice person. He looked like a really good person. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do something that I might regret, is what I'm thinking, but I just couldn't resist. So I messaged him, and I was like, you're the guy that I saw the other day at Tim Hortons, right? As if I didn't know. Of course, I knew. And it was just a conversation starter. I had no idea what to say. So then he messaged back. He's like, oh yeah, that was me. Like the next day or something, because I messaged him kind of late. And then the next day he messaged back. Yeah, that was me. And whatever. Then we just started talking, and yes, we talked for a couple days um, through the Facebook Messenger, and then exchanged numbers and texted, just a little bit here and there for a couple days, and then he was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go fishing at this lake. If you want to like meet me there, you can meet me there or whatever." So I was like, I do want to. And of course, now, by this time, me and my family had moved to a place in town, and we were just renting. Um, Me and my sister were renting, and my parents were living with us. And it was easier to just go meet him somewhere, but also, now that I'm reinstated, it was easier to just leave without having to explain myself too much, because I actually would have had friends that I could have went and hung out with. So I just kind of like take off and decide, yeah, I'm gonna go meet this guy. Here I am, a 20-year-old woman, and having to tell where I'm going and all of this stuff. Like, anyway, so I went to go meet him, and it was great. I mean, we just clicked. You can just, I mean, there's really no way to explain it other than that. We just really clicked, and he was so nice and so kind, and just not at all like this online guy that I had been seeing. He was just so different, like, and I knew right away that I really liked him. And when I left the lake and I was driving home, I remember thinking in my head, like, I was all smiles. I couldn't stop smiling. I was so happy, and I was thinking in my head, like, oh gosh, I'm in trouble, but I don't care. I just really, really liked him, like, right away. And we kept in touch, and every now and then we'd hang out. And of course, it got harder and harder to see him um, when I wanted to, because I'd have to always make these excuses about what I was doing, where I was going, and who I was hanging out with, and all this crap. And it got to the point where eventually my parents kind of clued in that I'm doing something that I'm not supposed to be doing, and start, questioning me more, and all of this stuff. And it was just like, it got to a point where I didn't care. I just really, really enjoyed spending time with this guy, and I was falling in love with him. And after I had, come to this conclusion that I loved him, and we hadn't had sex or anything by that point, but I just knew, like, I knew. Well, I'm thinking, like, okay, this is a good way to get away from this online guy who won't leave me the heck alone. But right after I come to that conclusion, like, yeah, I like am in love with this man. Well, guess who decides to move to my province? Yes, online crazy guy. And I honestly think that because I was, trying to pull away from him, he could sense that, and he was at that time finishing his university and looking for a job. And so he looked for a job in my area, even though I didn't say he should have done that or anything like that. But then again, he always came here without my permission too. The two times that I had met him, he just showed up here, or just made the plans to come here without really asking me about it, because I didn't actually want to meet him in person. It was safe from a distance. But he just kind of made the plans and was like, well, you're going to have to meet me, or else I'm flying up here for nothing. And of course, I I did meet him for those reasons, but it wasn't because I asked him to come. So this was a similar situation. I think he sensed that I was trying to pull away from him and put distance in, and then he moved here. Not in my town, but around the area. And of course, he knows where I am all the time and all this stuff because of, um, just having my phone with this app and being able to tell where I am at all times. So now he lives in my area, and he's pretty much like stalking me. And he finds out pretty quickly that I'm seeing somebody else. And, he's really mad about it because his reasoning was, you're forcing me to become a witness for you, and I'm doing all this for you, and now you're just dating somebody else who isn't even a witness. And I'm thinking in my head, like, I never asked him to become a witness. Yes, I was going to break up with him because he wasn't, but I didn't realize there were underlying things that were more than that. Um, then again, had he actually been a witness at the time, then I probably would have just married him without, even though there were so many things that were like ringing bells. I would have just married him anyway because he's a witness, so he's got to be a good person. But anyway, yeah, so he's making me feel bad about all that, and blah blah blah. And I'm just, I'm just trying to maintain some sort of a friendship. I'm thinking like, well, can we just still be friends? Because I don't want to just cut him off coldly because I'm feeling bad for, you know, dating somebody else. So he doesn't really say, okay, we'll be friends, or okay, we're broken up. He just kind of is like, okay, whatever. And we're still, you know, we're still talking occasionally. You know, he's messaging me every time he can tell that I'm hanging out with my, new boyfriend, who I might as well just say his name is Steve. Every time he can tell I'm hanging out with Steven, because he knows where I am all the time, he messages me and continuously, like constant, like one after the other. I'm getting all these messages, and my new boyfriend is like, who is this guy? Like, why is he messaging you so much? So I tell him that, oh, he's my ex, whatever. I don't go into too much detail. And he's like, yeah, well, and he gives me like a really good piece of advice that, um, of course, because he has lived, his life normally without the clutches of this crazy organization impairing on his judgment. So he says to me, well, I'm friends with, some of my exes, but when we first broke up, we had to take, time apart, just because you have to in the beginning, so that you can, move on, and then in the future you might be able to be friends with them again, depending on, the situation. And I was like, yeah, that's actually good advice. I probably should do that. Because yeah, it's not really working to completely keep me separate from this guy, and he's still very manipulative and controlling, and everything else, and making me feel guilty about ridiculous stuff. Yeah, so it was a good piece of advice, and I wish I had taken it sooner, but I didn't take the advice right away. It was just this big, ridiculous ordeal before he finally left me alone, and I left him alone, and I was able to just say, you know what, I really don't want to keep in touch with this person anymore. So I just completely, at that point, it was done fully and completely. But it took, my new um, love interest to point out that this guy was kind of crazy before I really realized it. So anyway, meanwhile, me and Steven are becoming more involved. We're in love. We've had sex at this point, um, probably about a couple months in, seeing each other quite frequently. I don't know, somewhere around there. And I was still going to meetings and not out in service as much because I felt like, well, kind of being a little bit hypocritical if I go out in service, you know, I didn't really feel right about going out in the ministry telling people how to live their lives according to Bible standards when I knew that I myself technically was not following all of those little details. But I still liked the community feeling of being a witness. I still liked being able to go to the meetings and socialize, because that's all I knew. My whole life, that was just how I socialized. So I still kind of would go to most of them. And, but going to them doesn't help. They constantly want to guilt trip you about things and everything else. But it was, to me at that point, there was nothing, the doctrine wasn't holding me in. There was nothing holding me in. There was just wanting to have friends and be a part of that community, and that was all that was left anymore for me. The beliefs weren't holding me in anymore, like they had done in the past. And I didn't really feel really the same as I ever did before I had gotten disfellowshipped. So I was just really happy with this guy I was with, and honestly, being with him made me see that and question this whole idea that only witnesses were worthy to survive Armageddon. Even then, I mean, you might not survive it if there's any little thing that you're doing that they don't approve of when God decides to bring upon this destruction. You probably not going to get through. So I started questioning that, because being around my new boyfriend and just seeing how he was, it didn't make sense to me that he would be destroyed. I was like, that's impossible. He's a really good person. My ex-boyfriend, I could have seen it. I know it sounds terrible. Nobody, necessarily deserves to be destroyed. Now I can see this. Especially when they're not doing anything bad, wrong. But my ex, I could see just who he was. He wasn't really he wasn't a kind person. He wasn't a caring person. He didn't care about anything. He was a very selfish individual. And I was just like, yeah, I can kind of see it with him. But with this guy, I was like, there's just no way. Like, he's so kind. He's so caring. He's so selfless. He, he's so peaceful, and he, really cares about the environment. He's an outdoors kind of guy. He's not, materialistic kind of guy. He was just like so good that I was like, there's no way. It just doesn't make sense that God would want to kill him, and other people out there like him. There had been people that I had met, that weren't witnesses before, that I had similar thoughts, but I just didn't know them enough, and I could write it off too well. That's how they appear to me. every time I see them, but that doesn't mean that's really who they are. But this guy, there was no writing that off. You know, he was an obviously good person. So I couldn't see how God would be able to destroy it. So anyway, eventually we were hanging out more and more, and it got to the point where I just pretty much, my parents knew that, hold on a second. My parents knew that I was dating him, and I pretty much started living with him because it was just a constant, ridiculous guilt tripping from my home. If I was there, it was like, oh, you gotta marry him right now. I mean, we were only dating for maybe, I mean, when my parents found out, it wasn't that far into it, maybe 3 months, if that. And they were already saying that we had to get married, you know. And I was like, oh my God, that's one thing to tell two JWs this. Because two JWs would be like, okay, yeah, we gotta get married. And it might seem normal. But to have to try to tell my boyfriend this, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna go and tell this guy that we have to get married. Sorry. And every time my parents saw him, the first thing they'd bring up is, oh, you're gonna have to get married and all of this stuff. He would just kind of let it slide off. But it was like, he had since told me, like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. They wanted us to get married, like, right away. I'm like, yes, I know. Anyway, so eventually, my dad just kind of ratted me out and told the elders that I was living with him, pretty much. So once he told the elders I was living with him, there was really nothing to stop me from completely moving in. In my mind, I was like, all right, whatever. I'm just gonna move in completely then. Moved all my stuff there. And I stopped going to meetings because, not that I had gone to every single one. I had gone to, I would say most of them. There's maybe 1 or 2 a month that I didn't go to. Just because, you know, you had a semblance of freedom. You know, you could wake up in the morning and you could sleep in and bask in the warmth of your significant other. Or you can get up and drag your ass to a meeting and sit there for 2 hours listening to watchtowers that tell you how bad of a person you are. So it was pretty easy to not go. But anyway, at that point, it was like I didn't feel I ever had a reason to go back, because the last time I had gone to the elders for a problem that I wanted help with, I actually wanted their help. I wanted their care. I wanted their understanding, their wisdom. They didn't help me. They just kicked me out, separated me from everyone that was in my life, my whole support network. So that didn't help. This time, I didn't want their help. I knew that if it came down to that same question, oh, are you going to completely ignore this guy and cut him out from your life, that I would say, nope, easy answer this time. No, there was no way I was going to do that. I was in love with him, like 100%. There was no way I was going to cut him off just because they were telling me to. And I knew that. And I knew that it was just going to end up in disfellowshipping. Even if I had said at that point, yes, I'll cut him off, I'll do anything, they would still disfellowship me, because it was so soon after I was reinstated that they would just see that as, oh, she's evil, kick her out again, you know? And there was no way I was going to put up with that anymore. You know, I was like, no, I'm not doing this again. It was humiliation, at the very least, and it was just torture having nobody. But at the same time, completely stopping going to meetings caused its own type of psychological problems, and it wasn't really until I stopped and the separation from people that I thought they'd care, but of course, if you're not going to meetings, they don't care about you. Nobody checks in, nobody cares. There's like one friend that I had that sent me a few letters. That's it. The elders tried to contact me to get me to go to this judicial committee, and I just never returned their calls. I was like, no, I don't care. And of course, nobody cared about me when I left. Nobody stopped in to see me. And I don't think anyone actually knew where I lived at that point, but nobody messaged or tried to encourage me, so it wasn't like there was really any real love there anyway. But it wasn't until I completely stopped going to those meetings that guilt and the fear that was been programmed into me began to rear its ugly face. And I felt depressed. I missed having that sense of community, having that support network. And the thing that hurt me the most, the thing that made me the most, I wasn't afraid of dying. Like I didn't have a fear of Armageddon in the sense that, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be destroyed forever, I'm gonna die. Like, I never had a fear of being dead. But what did hurt me, what did make me depressed, was when I was a young girl, my older brother died, and he was everything to me. He was my hero, and he died, and I might tell a story about that in the future, the circumstances surrounding that. And I was so scared that I would never see him again. And that is what destroyed me inside. That's what really tore me up. And just thinking about it now, that was the one thing that kept me hanging on to this religion for so long. The only thing was just that hope that I would see him again. So even when I felt like I couldn't, or I was such a bad person, I probably wouldn't make it, just that maybe I can kept me hanging on, for so long. But now, that will to hang on was no longer there. So I felt bad. I felt guilty, like maybe somehow my love for him was diminishing if I didn't have the desire to return to the organization. And of course, it didn't help at all when my parents would say things like, oh, don't you want to see your brother again? And, when he wakes up in the new system, he's going to ask where you are, and we're going to have to say that you didn't make it, and he's going to think you didn't care enough about him to be there. That really didn't help. So, because there was nothing, because I didn't know enough about anything else but this organization to know that these teachings were literally just made up little crap. I didn't know anything else, and of course, that hurt me. The thought that he would think I didn't love him. Even just thinking about it, I don't believe this anymore, but it still gets to me. So anyway, I just felt so terrible for so long, mainly because of that. So I just completely turned off my brain. I didn't want to hear any of it anymore. I threw away some books and magazines and stuff that I actually wish I had kept now, because now I can actually freely read them without it triggering, any fears or guilt or anything like that, and it's actually hilarious because you can see them trying to program you with these fears and guilt, and it becomes evident now that it's a cult, but at the time, I couldn't even look at anything that would trigger it. So I just stopped. I tried to live a normal life. I never had any desire to go back, even with that pain. I buried it. I had no desire to return. There was nothing that made me want to go back. So, and if I ever did, think about it at all, I still felt like maybe aspects of it were true. I had kind of started to develop a little bit of a different belief system about things, certain things over time. And but it didn't tear down the whole wall of JW doctrine or anything. It was just certain things over time that I started to look into that JWs just don't talk about or just don't teach about, that might cast some doubts about things. Certain things I just started to learn, and I was like, I wonder if this is true or if that's true. Never had any concrete answers on anything. Didn't tear down everything at that point. But I started to have a little bit different belief systems about things. And anyway, so 3 years into dating, my husband, I call him my husband now because we see each other as married, but technically we're not legally married. So 3 years into being with him, and we decided to watch a movie on Netflix that I thought would be really interesting. The Exodus, I think it was called. That movie about Moses with, I'm forgetting the main actor's name, same guy in the new Batman's. But anyway, I was like, okay, let's watch this movie. And my boyfriend seemed like, oh sure, he thought that would be interesting too. So we watched the movie. And at the end of the movie, when the sea closes up on the Egyptians and all this death and destruction, and it was like this massive trigger for me. So at the end of the movie, keep it like right now, I'm pregnant too. We're pregnant with our first child at this point, and this massive trigger, all this stuff I've been bearing, all these feelings I've been bearing, and this massive trigger, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I just start crying after the movie, and I say to my boyfriend, I don't know, I just need to know things because I'm having a baby and I don't know anything. I just felt like, what do I do? Here I am having a baby, and what am I supposed to tell him when he asks me if there's a God, or if the Bible is true, or if this or that? What am I supposed to tell him? All of these, I had no answers anymore. And I told him, what if it is all true and I'm just an idiot, and now not only am I dying, but my son is dying and I can't protect him. And these fears came to my mind, and I told my husband about it, and he's just like, honestly, if there's a God out there that is going to rid the earth of these evil people, we're not going to be one of them, or our son. It doesn't make any sense for us to be one of them because we're not bad people. It was true. I was like, you're right. That's true. But of course, with my JW doctrine, it was like, oh, it doesn't matter. If you're not a JW, you're dying. So I had these fears, and I made a resolution then and there that I would find out the actual truth. I needed to know what was true because I needed to be able to teach my son. I needed to be able to have answers for him. So finally, after 2 or 3 years of just burying my feelings and everything, I am deciding I'm going to find out if the organization I was raised in was actually what I thought it was, if it was actually the truth, or if it was just a bunch of crap. So in the time that I had separated myself from it, I had all these little questions that I just didn't find out answers for because I was scared. I was scared to look into it. I was scared to find out that okay, it is true, and now I have to go back. So I just buried it all. But now I can finally answer those questions. I had to know. I was having a kid, and I had to know what was right. And so I started some research. And the first thing I started to look into, because I knew what the organization taught about Charles Taze Russell and everything in that documentary that they brought out about the beginnings of the witnesses. All of that. Like, I'd seen both of them many times. And, you know, when I was a witness, I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. But now that I'm trying to really find out, not just from their perspective, because of course their perspective is going to be biased. You know, that's something that I had learned after leaving and not, you know, being indoctrinated every day. I learned that, hey, maybe taking one side of the story isn't the best way to find out information. So I was like, okay, instead of looking into the Bible Teach book or the magazines, you know, to find answers, I'm going to start researching other things. So the first thing I started to look into was Charles Taze Russell and his actual history, and also Rutherford, using Wikipedia, basically. That's what I started with, and then just other things that had nothing to do with witnesses or ex-witnesses. It was just information that I could find online about them. There wasn't much I could find about Rutherford. There was quite a bit I found about Charles Taze Russell that was like, interesting. The witnesses sure don't mention that. But finding out he was a Freemason was interesting, because I had since learned a little bit about Freemasons since leaving the witnesses. Again, I knew when I stopped going to meetings, I knew nothing about the outside world, like nothing. And I'm serious, nothing. And so just learning little bits, you know, planted little seeds of maybe this wasn't the truth after all, but at the time. Anyway, so I found out he was a Freemason. And that was interesting for sure. And just out of curiosity, I decided I'd look into the Mormon Church and a little history on them. And I also learned that Joseph Smith was a Freemason. And I saw quite a few similarities between them and witnesses, which struck me as odd. If the witnesses were the one true organization, there shouldn't really be a ton of similarities with them and another religion. But that was interesting. So after that, I was like, maybe I'll look into the governing body, because at this point I wasn't convinced. It was definitely interesting, and I needed to do more research. So I was like, what can I learn about the governing body? So I tried to Google them. There was really not much about them on Wikipedia that was interesting to me. So, but eventually I stumbled on a site called jwsurvey.org. And I thought this was a Jehovah's Witness authorized site because it looked like it was. And so I started reading some things, because this was the only information I could find about the governing body. So I started reading it. And after reading about each of the members, there was one member in particularly that struck me, Anthony Morris. And when I read the description of him, it was like, just how it was written, it kind of seemed like, did a witness write this? Is this an authorized site or not? And I was like, I don't know. I couldn't tell. But it was sure interesting, so I just kept reading the site, because by that point I'm hooked. I'm like, okay, I gotta figure out more. What can I learn on this site? So I took the survey, because it was called JW Survey. So I was like, where's the survey? So I took the survey. I started reading answers that other people had chosen. The percentage of people who chose these answers for the survey. And I realized that, I was not the only witness who suppressed doubts my whole life about little things here and there. I was like, wow, everybody's doing this. I'm not the only one. That's interesting. So, shortly after that, I found a free copy online of the book Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz. It wasn't the whole book, there was just bits and pieces of it that I could read for free. And I tried to buy the book, but I looked at it on Amazon and it was so expensive that I just can't justify paying $100 for it. But some of them were way more than that too. But if anybody has, a copy that they would be willing to lend me or sell me for a decent price, I would definitely buy it. So I would like to read the whole thing through and through properly in order. But anyway, so I read some part of that book that I could free from online, and I learned that the organization, why it went from one president to a governing body, because in the state of Pennsylvania at the time, they were forced to move to a governing body because the state had a law passed that any corporation with the president had to be voted in by the members of the corporation or the followers of the organization. So that's why they changed it. They didn't want it to just be one guy anymore because they didn't want the members at the time to have any say in who got to be the president. So they changed it. And then they played off that change as if it was, because now we're more like the Bible and how they did things at that time. They had a governing body too. But it never once mentions the word governing body in the Bible. They just have put that into our heads for so long that the older men of the congregation were the governing body that we just kind of seem to think it's the same thing, but it's really not. Anyway, so I was reading small sections and I could see that the governing body did not make their decisions out of love or even based on the Bible. It was largely, more or less, to help the corporation to prosper. They didn't care about individuals in the organization. It became clear that one of the questions that I had in the time that I had stopped going to meetings was, is this just another corporation raking in money, like every other religious corporation out there? Or is this God's organization? I couldn't figure out how it was making its money at the time. But after reading some of that book, I could easily see it was just another corporation. It had nothing to do with God. The men at the top were not chosen by God. And I learned all kinds of disturbing things that just made it more and more evident that it was not God's organization, like the child abuse, the sexual molestation, rape, cover-ups. They will fight them in court. They'll pay, money from our donated funds to fight them in court, to pay off the people taken to court, to keep all of this under wraps, so that they appear clean. Nobody, hardly anyone within the organization that are still active members have any clue about the extent of the child abuse problem. They might know a little bit of it, but they have no idea how far this problem actually spreads. I learned about the UN membership. As soon as they were called out on it, they immediately left. They were a non-governmental organization within the UN in the US. And as soon as it was noticed, they left. But in other parts of the world, you can still see that they are involved as a non-governmental organization. You just have to do the research. And it's pretty easy to do. The UN isn't secret about who is with them as a non-governmental organization. And if that doesn't make any sense to you as non-Jehovah's Witnesses, I will explain. The witnesses view the United Nations as the wild beast pictured in Revelation, the last book of the Bible. And the United Nations are supposed to turn on all religion and try to put an end to it. And that is supposed to be when God, that is the Great Tribulation before Armageddon, for all witnesses who are, trying to be stomped out. And then that's right before Armageddon, right? So God's supposed to step in. Now he destroys everybody. The wild beast, the UN. The wild beast, the United Nations is really not looked upon with favor within the organization. So the fact that they were a non-governmental organization within the United Nations, recognized within them, they were a part of the United Nations, just really was inappropriate for them to do so. How I learned how they make money, even though they like to boast that we are run off of voluntary donations, and this is proof that we're God's organization because we can still function and print all of this literature, even though the only income that we have is through the donations of our members. But that wasn't always the case. I learned why they switched to voluntary donations as opposed to selling the literature. They used to sell the literature to the witnesses and also to the public. The public had to buy it as well. And I learned why they changed to voluntary donations. Basically, so they could just not have to pay taxes, because if they were making money, they had to pay taxes. So this voluntary donation thing allowed them to claim themselves as a charity. Now they don't have to pay taxes. Interesting. Why they changed the baptismal questions in the 80s to God's Spirit-directed organization, dedicating our lives to His Spirit-directed organization, instead of dedicating our lives to Jehovah and His Son and His Holy Spirit. So the baptismal questions used to be, do you recognize that your dedication of baptism is to God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit? But in the 80s, I can't remember exactly what year it was. I think it was, I'm not going to say because I can't remember. But they changed it to, do you recognize? It was something like this, and it might not be the exact right wording, but I got baptized and I remember the question. Do you recognize that in getting baptized that you are dedicating yourself to God's Spirit-directed organization here on earth? So when we say yes, we are dedicating ourselves to the organization, the corporation, the Watchtower Society, and it has nothing to do with God. And the reason they changed that was so that, again, that was about making money, because the Bethelites were supposed to be getting paid, and the fact is they weren't getting paid. They weren't getting EI or CPP or anything like that. And if they were going, they would get in trouble not putting any funds aside for their workers unless they change something here. So instead of dedicating our lives to God, now we dedicate our lives to the organization, so we can be considered volunteers working at Bethel, and therefore they would not have to put any money aside for us in regards to pension plan or the unemployment insurance or anything like that. So they changed it again as a way to make money and not have to pay out anybody. And how much they're worth in real estate, learning that is unbelievable. Pretty much the reason they just keep building all of these buildings is nothing to do with the need. They are losing, thousands of witnesses every year, if not more than that. And they do not they do not have a need to keep building these buildings. It's purely just to have a high net worth, and they do it from free labor. So it's not like they have to pay people to do them. They're getting their witnesses to make them, and then they're owning them, and they sell them, and they make a lot of money off of that. Learning that they have old folks homes for JWs, elderly JWs, who that was shocking to me. I was like, oh my gosh, seriously? I really don't think many of the rank and file know this. I don't know if there's old folks homes all over, but they're definitely, it's definitely a newish thing. And I believe Canada just has one in Ontario. But yeah, they're charging people a ridiculous amount of monthly fee, these elderly people or their families, to keep all these JW elderly people together. You know, it's basically just this ridiculous way of making money, and they're using the old JWs to try to get as much money out of them before they kick the bucket. And again, the people that work there are JWs. It's free labor. It's a charity. They consider themselves a charity even though they're charging people to live there. And the people that work there are usually pioneers, just getting their hours, you know, taking care of the elderly. Unbelievable. Oh, there are so many things. How much money they're paying out in millions of dollars of lawsuits, you know, because of the countless amounts of children that have been molested and not helped by the elders or the society. In fact, the elders and the society enable child molesters to continue doing what they're doing because they don't do anything about it. Literally nothing. If there wasn't another person watching this child be molested, then I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. We can't even go to the police with this. We encourage you not to do so. We encourage you not to tell anybody else in the congregation. You know, I don't want to cause any divisions. They changed their stance on disfellowshipping in the 50s when they decided it suited their needs to do so. Even though just, 3 to 4 years earlier, they plainly said in an Awake magazine that disfellowshipping is of pagan origin. Excommunication, disfellowshipping. They use the word excommunication. Say it's a pagan origin, it's evil, and they denounced the Catholic Church for doing it. They said it's a form of blackmail to do that. The Catholic Church should be ashamed of themselves. But then they quickly caught on that, hey, this is a really good thing for us. We're going to do this. And they're so quick to disfellowship people for very minuscule things, like smoking or for, say a person's an alcoholic and they go to them for help. Well, instead of helping, they'll just disfellowship them. This person's got to go to something like AA to get help. I mean, no, we're not going to help you. You need to help yourself, They're more likely to disfellowship a parent for warning other parents of a child molester in the congregation than they are to disfellowship the child molester. It's happened. It's disgusting. The fact that they're so quick to disfellowship people even for just changing their mind about their beliefs, which is our fundamental human right. We're allowed to change our minds. That's a right that we have, all humans. But we'll be called an apostate, we'll be disfellowshipped. How easy it is to get disfellowshipped for certain people, and how hard it is for people that have actually committed serious crimes like child molestation. There's no way, if you knew the extent of this, that you would believe that this is God's organization. Just no way. And you can't use the excuse that these men are imperfect, because if they're so imperfect and they make such grave mistakes, then why are they judging other people and kicking them out and separating them from their family? They shouldn't do that then, if they're imperfect. They don't have the right to do that. At the very least, when they hear of a child molester, at the very least, if they hear of somebody beating their wife, at the very least, they should contact the proper authorities. But they don't do that. So anyway, when you open your eyes, it's really clear to see that it's not God's organization. When you compare them to other organizations that are recognized by witnesses, as clearly cults, the similarities between them are overwhelming. When you read professional psychologist books about mind control within either a relationship or a group, an organization, or a cult, it's clear to see the JW org fits the mold perfectly. They do a good job of fooling their members because they have over like 100 years of practice of this. So they're very good at using the Bible as a method of guilt, control, and fear, and using God as a scapegoat for their terrible behavior. But the fact is, many of the things that we've had to endure and put up with as Jehovah's Witnesses rest at the feet of the men that run this organization. They're the ones making the policies, they're the ones making the rules, and their elders are carrying them out. So once you realize this, it's pretty hard not to speak out about the unnecessary pain that you've gone through. And I'm not trying to attack any of the witnesses' personal beliefs in God or the Bible, and I realize a lot of people need to and want to believe in God, in the Bible. Like, even you might need to believe in this. And I don't want to take that away from you. I completely understand what it's like to have to hold on to a belief that you're going to see your dead loved one again. I completely understand having to have something to hold on to. And I don't want to take that away from you because I know how hard it is having that whole thing shaken. And I don't want to destroy that. What I want to do is to enable witnesses to use their powers of reason, like the witnesses organization likes to call it. Use your power of reason. Use your critical thinking skills. They're the same thing. If you believe that your brain was, built by God to be used, then you should use it, and you should analyze some of the doctrines and the beliefs that you have to accept to be a witness. There's things that you have to accept, even though you might question it, and maybe a few years down the road, the organization says, "Oh, we have new light, and this has changed." You may have questioned that a long time before, but if you had mentioned it or brought it up, you'd be considered an apostate. So please, use your powers of reason. Use your critical thinking skills. These things that you have to accept to be considered a Jehovah's Witness, you really should examine them. And you would see how easy these doctrines just fall apart under scrutiny. A lot of these things we just don't think about that much because it's just something that we have to believe to be witness. But if we really start thinking about it, if we really start learning about the world around us, then a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. So, that being said, I don't want to take anyone's belief in God away from them. I don't want to take anyone's belief in the Bible or any other holy book away from them. If that's something that helps you, and as long as it's not a reason to cause hatred or separation or whatever, then by all means, believe it. But please, please, just analyze what you're believing and what you're told. Use your power of reason to really think about it. I know you guys don't like the word critical thinking because the society likes to use the words critical thinking as being critical of God. But yet, critical thinking and the power of reason, your powers of reason, are the same thing. So, use it. Figure it out. Analyze. In the future, I plan on making more videos about conclusions that I've come to while analyzing and scrutinizing things. And but right now, this is my story. So this is the story. Finally, it's done. Why I left and why I never returned. So yeah, anything I said you can look up. I obviously didn't provide printed material or anything to prove it, but maybe I will provide some information in the description below. But even if I don't, if you're a witness watching this, this is very easy information to come by. So please, it's as easy as doing a Google search. You know, not everybody is an apostate. People don't care if you're a Jehovah's Witness or a Catholic or a Muslim or anything. They just care about the facts. And there are a lot of news stories out there negative towards Muslims, Catholics, Mormons, Jewish people, you know, just pointing out some of the negativities maybe and the true or false within their organizations. And, you know, therefore, are they the true religion? Because people seem to hate them. People don't care about your religion. They just care about the facts. And there is a lot of legitimate news articles out there that show very easily about the child molestation. I mean, there's stuff going on right now that you can easily find. So please look it up. You do yourself a favor to do so. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you all have a good day.